finally, Mika, the Russians are coming.
Yes, they are.
And they're coming again for their main man, Donald J. Trump. Our intel community actually did their job, told the intelligence community that they had information, that once again the Russians were trying to interfere with America's democratic process in 2020, and that they were going to interfere with America's democratic process in 2020 for the benefit of one man, Donald Trump. Donald Trump didn't like that, immediately fired his acting director of national intelligence, and talked about hiring and hired probably the least qualified person ever to occupy a spot in an important national security role in the history of Washington, D.C. And that's saying quite a lot. But just he's extraordinarily incompetent, and it puts America's national security at risk. Fortunately, Mika, we also heard yesterday that may be a temporary position.
Well, yeah. Well, let's just back up here and lay it out. We'll begin with that very big news on why the president forced out the nation's top spy chief. A former intel official tells NBC News that acting director of national intelligence, Joseph Maguire, who was under consideration to be permanent DNI, was pushed aside because the president was angry that lawmakers were briefed on Russia's plans to help him get reelected. News of the briefing, which was held last Thursday, was first reported by the New York Times. Sources tell both the Times and the Washington Post that the president erupted at Maguire the very next day, concerned that Democrats would use the information against him. A former official tells NBC News that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is, quote, nearing a meltdown over Maguire's removal and the reason behind it. As our colleagues Ken Delanian and Andrea Mitchell report, the episode has raised the specter that Trump is punishing intelligence officials for providing accurate intelligence to members of Congress who are cleared to receive it. This is how the system is supposed to work. We should also note that Maguire's testimony back in September, when he told lawmakers that the whistleblower, quote, did the right thing and followed the law every step of the way by reporting concerns over the president's phone call with Ukraine's president. Trump sent shockwaves through the intelligence community when he announced Wednesday that one of his partisan allies, the U.S. ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, would replace Maguire as acting DNI, despite having no intelligence experience.
Well, he's actually a partisan hack. He's not a partisan ally. Everybody that's known him says he's a partisan hack and is ill-equipped to handle this position. He's in way over his head, whether he holds the job for 1 week or 1 day.
However, last night, the president tweeted his intention to nominate someone else for the job, quote, soon, perhaps responding to the pushback to this. Willie?
All right, so let's bring in NBC correspondent Hans Nichols with more on this. He's at the White House. Also, NBC News correspondent covering national security and intelligence, Ken Delanian. And Ken, as Mika mentioned, you and Andrea spoke to several different sources for this story. It looks pretty clear. I'll let you fill in the blanks, but the director of national intelligence, a representative for him, Mr. Maguire, went over, talked to the House Intelligence Committee and said the Russians are coming for the 2020 election. They want Donald Trump to win again. Donald Trump catches wind of this briefing. Again, DNI just doing its job. Berates Joseph Maguire, the acting director of national intelligence, and on Wednesday announces that he's out and Richard Grenell is in. How did this all go down?
Willie, my intelligence sources are absolutely aghast over this. This is one of their worst nightmares because what you're describing here is the behavior of an autocrat. I mean, and up until now, well, we all know that Donald Trump has never been interested in this question of foreign election interference, has not really chaired meetings about it, has not said anything publicly about it. But he has allowed his government to do some things, and they have done some things. There's not really a unified effort, but the FBI, DHS, and the intelligence community are taking steps to try to protect the 2020 election. And one of the things they did was they appointed an election security czar in the intelligence community, a woman named Shelby Pearson, who had been a top official, a top analyst over Russia matters at the DNI. And her job is to synthesize all the intelligence, to look at the threats, and to brief lawmakers. And that's exactly what she did last week. lawmakers on the House Intelligence Committee of both parties, whose job is to hear this information as part of their oversight role. They're cleared to hear this information. And she told them, our sources tell us, that there is evidence that Russia has developed a preference for Donald Trump, that Russia wants to see Donald Trump reelected, and that Russia is continuing to meddle in our politics. Now, she said that before. She said that the Russians are back at it, and we're not very clear on exactly the classified details of what they think the Russians are up to specifically, although we are told that it's really the same playbook from 2016, particularly the disinformation and social media manipulation. But here's what happened. After Donald Trump heard about this briefing from Devin Nunes, his ally, the ranking Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, he hit the roof. And the next day, in a meeting with DNI Joe Maguire, he berated Maguire about why this briefing took place at all and why he had to hear about this from Nunes. And particularly, why was he sharing this information about the Russians with Adam Schiff, Trump's nemesis? And Trump was worried that this could be used against him. So Maguire's out now. So the specter of intelligence officials speaking truth to power, which is their job, and they are being punished for it, Willie.
So again, the director of national intelligence, that office goes in, does its job, briefs the intelligence committee. Devin Nunes, the ranking Republican on that committee, calls the White House, effectively tells the president, hey, they're telling on you in this meeting. And Adam Schiff is in the room. That upsets the president of the United States. He berates Joseph Maguire, kicks him out of his job. So, Hans Nichols, that raises the question, if, in fact, Richard Grenell is a temporary hire, if he is just a placeholder, there's talk already about who might take that position, another Trump defender.
Doug Collins, congressman from Georgia, also thinking about running for the Senate. The president last night on Air Force One mentioned he's thinking about Doug Collins for that position. Now, it's not final. He said that there are other names that he's considering, but the clock is ticking here, and I don't mean to bore everyone, but there's something called the Vacancies Act, and that really would allow Richard Grenell to be acting through sometime through mid-March unless the president officially and formally nominates someone else. So the clock is ticking. And if he does nominate someone else, then you can have Richard Grenell stay there potentially longer as the Senate fights this all out for a confirmation battle. One person that we haven't heard from in all this, I think it's crucially important, Senator Richard Burr from North Carolina. Remember last time when the president nominated John Ratcliffe, another congressman, for this job? This was before Maguire got the position. Burr made it be known that he wasn't overly excited about this. You still need the Senate on this, and we'll see to what extent Doug Collins passes muster there.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.